Good afternoon and welcome to AP European History with Mr. Bobby. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 25, Nationalism, as always from the McKay, Hill, and Buckler text, 7th edition. And in this lecture we'll be discussing nation building in the United States and the modernization of Russia, sections 3 and 4 of your text from Chapter 25. First of all, starting out with the United States, the McKay feels it's important to put in a small piece, specifically in this chapter on nation building, just so that we have some type of comparison. I think it's a lot easier when you are understanding your own history to understand the history of others. And so he includes a piece on the Civil War and what's exactly going on at this time, because ironically, as our Civil War is happening is when many of these European nation building struggles are also happening. So the Civil War in the United States. Separatist nationalism and bloody nation building is how Europe saw the Civil War in the United States. They saw slavery as an economic institution, but it really became a we versus they mentality, which we will find is going to be prevalent in many European nations as we move towards World War I. Textile mills in Europe and New England drove the continuation of a slave-based agriculture, the necessity for cotton, and not having a great way to produce it, it needing to be handpicked, reinvigorated slavery in the United States. And it's of note that by this time, slavery has been outlawed in England and in many places in Europe. Following the Mexican War, should the newly ceded territory be slave or free territory? Tensions ignite. Many people in the North prospered during the war, while many people in the South suffered. All key points in review of our Civil War and comparing it to nation building in Europe. Outcomes of the Civil War. The Homestead Act of 1862, this gave Western land to settlers. The 13th Amendment in 1865 abolished slavery. Northerners lose interest in the policy of freed blacks, and Southerners are eventually able to create a new slave culture of sharecropping, which will go on for another century. Free but unequal will be the policy for years to come. It's important to note, we mentioned the Homestead Act at the beginning here. Another connection that we need to make with the Civil War and with continued westward expansion in the United States is room for more and more immigrants. Many European immigrants will be looking to find a new home and settle in the United States. On to the modernization of Russia, and this is an extremely important section of your text. It should be starred in your text or in your notes to refer back to, because it's really going to connect. Your text doesn't just take one chapter. Obviously, they're talking about the whole of Europe and a lot of things going on around the world to talk about the Russian Revolution. But really, this is the base layer. This is the foreground, the groundwork for the Russian Revolution. And we need to start by understanding that about 90% of the people in Russia still lived off of the land. The Tsar was one of the last remaining monarchs in Europe. We've talked about in previous chapters the ideas of how, as other nations were moving progressively forward, Russia at times was moving backwards. They reinstituted serfdom, or people being tied to the land, and the aristocracy. And it's evidenced by this monarchy that is still going on. We're in the middle of, or nearing the end of the Romanov dynasty. Serfdom was prevalent, very much like slavery, little or no rights and exploitation. And then comes the Crimean War. And the Crimean War is definitely going to be on your test. It's also very significant, from 1853 to 1856. And it's a dispute with France over who should protect Christian shrines in the Ottoman Empire. It's a humiliating defeat, and this exposes Russia's lack of development and instigates leaders in Russia to try and quickly advance and catch up to the rest of Europe and to the West. Alexander II becomes Tsar. He's Tsar from 1855 to 1881, and he is forced into, as I just mentioned, this rapid social change due to peasant rebellions after the war. You'll notice that after this war, we'll talk about another war in a couple of minutes with Japan. These are seen as weak points for the government, and we will find rebellion and uprising that happens in an effort to make change. The reforms of 1861 are very significant. They free the serfs. Peasants receive half of the land. Reformers were limited due to collectivization, which made it difficult to improve agricultural methods or rise socioeconomically. And this is very significant because they're going to move forward, but they're still going to be far behind the rest of Europe. And this is going to play a major role in World War I and World War II, and so on. The Zemstvo is an important term. It's a local assembly elected by towns, peasant, village, and noble landowners. They put together to deal with local problems, and they're ultimately unsuccessful. The Zemstvo and the Duma, which we'll mention in a couple of slides, are both put into place to appease the people as the monarch and the aristocracy try to hold on to and maintain power rather ineffectively in Russia. Industrial development and reform. Russia increases its private railways tenfold. Increased export of grain earned money for further industrialization. The military was strengthened, and ultimately what we'll see in Russia is a major spread in Marxism. It's an era of reform ends with the assassination of Alexander II, and we'll move forward. The really important name to note here is Sergei Witte. He's the Minister of Finance from 1892 to 1903. He moves forward with state-owned railroads, high protective tariffs, and he puts Russia on the gold standard. He also allows for an influx of foreign investment, and as it says in your text, he uses the West to catch up with the West. I've got that in quotation marks down there, using the West. And what he means is he encourages all of these investors to come in and to start industry within Russia to benefit Russia. The Revolution of 1905 is where we'll probably pick up in a couple of chapters, and Russia is looking toward East Asia for territorial expansion, and this is where we get the Russo-Japanese War. It ends in a major defeat for Russia and causes a great upheaval at home because nobody in Europe even, let alone the people of Russia, thought that it would be possible for an Asian nation or any nation from around the world, withstanding the United States, to defeat a European power. When Japan attacked, kind of a surprise attack, to keep Russia from expanding further into the Koreas and into more of China, they won decisively. Many groups socially and ethnically seized the weakness and revolted, wanting autonomy and democracy. And they saw this as a real chance with a weakened central government. This leads us to one of many, many examples that will occur between now and 1917 of just how naive and how inept the monarchy was, specifically Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. And it starts with Bloody Sunday. And Bloody Sunday is really an instigating factor. Workers and families peacefully protested outside the Winter Palace. Orders were given. Troops opened fire and killed hundreds. This was bad publicity. It was a bad move all around. And this turned all of the workers, some of which had still kind of hung on with the Tsar, against the Tsar. And it was very detrimental and was signaling the end. Although he would hold on for another 12 years, it was a miserable 12 years and would lead to a lot of change. To counteract this, the Tsar issued the October Manifesto, and these were his concessions. The the general strike that went on after Bloody Sunday, he gave in to concessions. He granted full civil rights and promised a popularly elected parliament, the Duma, and this helped the monarchy to survive. The Duma was the parliament. They had no real power, as the Tsar still had absolute veto over any legislation, and this was an issue of the fundamental laws, and this was issued the night before the Duma opened, the parliament opened, and it granted a new constitution, and the power of the Duma was basically insignificant. Another name of note in this section on the modernization of Russia is Stolpen. He was the chief minister, and he pushed through many reforms, moving slowly at least towards some type of modernization. And the thing that still held Russia back was this idea that they were going to continue to maintain power isolated at the top. Russia is moving forward, but they are never going to catch up. And all of these actions that are starting right now are going to play a key role in the difficulties that the rest of the world will have with Russia in the time to come.